It was a Friday night when my parents decided to head out for a dinner date, leaving me home alone for the first time. I was excited but also a little anxious. After all, I was 16 and had always been somewhat of a scaredy cat. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt almost oppressive. I spent the evening binge-watching horror movies, laughing at the unrealistic scenarios while keeping my phone close in case I needed to call my parents. As the night wore on, the atmosphere changed. The wind picked up, howling outside like a mournful spirit. I dismissed it, trying to focus on the flickering images on the screen, but as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I began to feel an unsettling presence. I brushed it off as my imagination until I heard a noise, soft, deliberate, and unmistakably coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I muted the TV, straining to listen. There it was again, a faint shuffling sound. Just the house settling, I told myself, even as my instincts screamed at me to check it out. Summoning my courage, I decided to investigate, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the walls that seemed to close in around me. With each step toward the hallway, I felt more exposed and more vulnerable. I reached the end of the corridor and shone the flashlight into the shadows, but there was nothing there, only the eerie silence of the night. I took a breath and turned to go back when I heard a soft giggle. My blood ran cold. The sound was childlike and innocent, yet it sent chills down my spine. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my grip. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering. No answer, just that chilling silence. I forced myself to move, returning to the living room and locking the door behind me. I sat on the couch, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the atmosphere felt thick with tension, as if the shadows themselves were watching me. The night dragged on, and the haunting feeling of being observed persisted. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through social media, but the unease gnawed at me. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Panic surged within me as I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it back on. The beam cut through the blackness, but my heart raced at the thought of being completely alone. The only sounds were the howling wind and the creaking of the house echoing ominously. I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that the power would likely be back on soon, but that childish giggle echoed in my mind, taunting me. As if responding to my fear, I heard the shuffling again, this time closer than before. It was coming from the kitchen. My breath quickened as I glanced toward the darkened hallway. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know what was happening. I gripped my flashlight tightly, its beam casting shaky light across the room as I stepped cautiously toward the kitchen. I peeked around the corner, heart pounding in my chest, but saw nothing. The kitchen was empty, eerily so, and I was about to turn back when I noticed the back door was ajar. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I distinctly remembered locking it earlier. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. I didn't want to think about who or what could be outside. Just then I heard the giggle again, this time right behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the living room. There, silhouetted against the dim light, stood a figure. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I screamed, bolting back down the hallway toward the front door, but it swung open just as I reached it. The figure stepped closer, and I was paralyzed with fear. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Help me," she whispered, her voice low and chilling. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something about her plea held me captive. "Please, let me in," she continued, inching closer. I stumbled back, heart racing. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice trembling. I wanted to believe it was a prank, some twisted joke, but the desperation in her tone felt real. My thoughts raced. Should I call the police? What if she was dangerous? Just then, I caught a glimpse of something behind her, dark shapes moving in the shadows. Panic surged through me, and I bolted past her, racing for the front door. I flung it open and ran outside, heart pounding in my ears. The night air hit me like a cold wave, but I didn't stop. I sprinted across the yard, the moonlight guiding my way. I could hear her footsteps behind me, echoing in the stillness. "Help!" I screamed, hoping someone would hear me. I glanced back, but she was gone. Had I imagined her? I didn't have time to think. I ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door. "Please, someone help me," I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. Moments later, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman, peered out. "What's going on, dear?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. "There's someone in my house," I gasped, breathless. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted to alarm. Are you sure? Have you called the police? I shook my head, too scared to speak. You stay here. I'll call them, she said, moving to grab her phone. I stood in the living room, anxiety clawing at my insides. The shadows felt thicker, and I could hear the wind howling outside, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe. A few minutes later, the police arrived, and I rushed to explain everything that had happened. Mrs. Henderson stood beside me, her face pale with worry. The officers assured us they would investigate, but deep down I felt a sense of dread. They searched my house, checking every room and corner, but found nothing. It's probably just a prank, one officer said, trying to reassure me, but I didn't believe him. You don't understand. I saw her, I insisted, but they dismissed my fears. We'll patrol the area, but it's likely nothing to worry about, another officer added. The officers left, and I returned to my house with Mrs. Henderson. I locked the door behind me, my heart still racing. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the memory of the woman haunted me. I could still hear her voice whispering in my ear. The night dragged on, the wind howling outside as I tried to settle down. I sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with the TV, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the figure in my house. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to me like a shadow. The hours passed, and I felt the weight of exhaustion tugging at my eyelids. I reluctantly decided to head to bed, hoping a few hours of sleep would clear my mind. As I crawled under the covers, I told myself I was safe. My parents would be back in the morning, and everything would be fine. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a soft thud coming from the hallway. I bolted upright, heart racing. No, 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 I whispered to myself. I grabbed my flashlight, illuminating the dark room with its glow. The thud came again, followed by a faint whisper. My blood ran cold as I strained to listen. Help me! It was her voice, echoing in the stillness. I felt frozen in place, panic rising within me. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to get out. I tiptoed to the door, my heart pounding. I peeked out into the hallway, and to my horror, I saw her standing there, shrouded in darkness, her eyes glinting in the dim light. I gasped, stumbling back into my room. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered, her voice calm but distant. There's someone in my house. I need help, I pleaded, barely able to keep my voice steady. Stay on the line with me. Can you lock your door? She asked. I glanced at my door, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. Yes, but I think she's right outside, I whimpered. Stay quiet and help will be there soon, the operator reassured me. I held my breath, the silence stretching on, and then I heard the doorknob jiggling. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the wall, desperately wishing I could vanish. The door creaked open, and the figure stepped inside. It was the woman again, her face still obscured. Help me, she repeated, her voice softer now. Please, they're coming. I felt tears welling in my eyes. Who's coming? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She stepped closer, and for the first time I saw her face. It was gaunt, eyes wide and filled with terror. They want me? You have to help me. Just then, I heard sirens approaching, a distant sound growing louder. The woman's expression shifted, fear overtaking her. They're here, she whispered. You have to hide. Before I could react, she darted back into the hallway, and I stood frozen. The sirens blared outside, and the door swung open again, this time revealing the police officers. Get back, I shouted, pointing down the hall, but the officers rushed past me. Stay here, one of them called as they moved into the darkness. I listened, heart pounding, as they shouted for the woman, but the only sound that filled the air was the echo of their voices. Moments later, I heard a scuffle, and then silence. My pulse raced as one of the officers emerged from the hallway, breathless. There's no one here, he said, looking bewildered. What do you mean? She was just here, I exclaimed, panic rising in my throat. The officer shook his head. We checked every room. Are you sure you saw someone? I felt my world spinning, disbelief clawing at me. Yes, she was right there. I pointed, but the hallway was empty. Just then, another officer came in, his face pale. We found her, he said, but his tone was grave. She's outside. I rushed to the door, heart racing, and followed the officers outside. The air was cold, and the yard was eerily quiet. They had found her at the edge of the property, standing in the shadows, her back to us. Ma'am, are you okay? One of the officers asked cautiously. She turned slowly, her face illuminated by the moonlight, revealing a twisted smile. I'm fine, she said, her voice sweet yet sinister. Thank you for letting me go. I felt my stomach drop as she began to walk away, the officers frozen in disbelief. "Wait!" I called out, but she simply waved over her shoulder, vanishing into the darkness. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what just happened. "We'll need to patrol the area," one officer said. But deep down, I knew she wasn't just going to disappear. As they turned to leave, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The night felt thicker and darker, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me. The officers returned to their cars, and I stood there, feeling lost and alone. What had just happened? What was that woman? As I made my way back inside, a chill swept through me. The darkness seemed to cling to the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I locked the door, heart pounding, and turned to head back to the living room. The TV flickered back on, the glow illuminating the room, but the comfort of the familiar scene felt distant. I couldn't shake the terror that had settled in my bones. Hours passed, and I forced myself to try and sleep, but every creak of the house echoed like a warning. Just before dawn, I finally dozed off, exhaustion taking its toll. But my dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, the woman's chilling voice haunting me. When morning finally arrived, I awoke to bright sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt a sense of relief washes over me, but the memories of the night came flooding back. I grabbed my phone, ready to call my parents, when I noticed a notification that made my blood run cold. It was a news alert: woman escapes from local mental health facility. My heart raced as I read the details. The woman I had seen had been reported missing, and the authorities were warning residents to stay vigilant. She was considered dangerous. I dropped my phone, a wave of panic crashing over me. Had she been in my house? The chilling realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The woman wasn't just an innocent stranger, she was a threat. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains to scan the yard, but there was nothing. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, but I felt anything but safe. I dialed my parents, voice trembling as I explained everything that had happened. They rushed home, concern lacing their voices. When they arrived, the relief in their eyes was palpable, but I knew the danger wasn't over. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal, but I remained on edge. I avoided being alone in the house, always keeping the doors locked and the windows shut. I couldn't shake the feeling that she might come back, that the darkness had its claws in me. It wasn't until a week later that I received a knock at the door. My heart raced as I peered through the peephole. 2 officers stood on my porch, their expressions serious. I opened the door cautiously. "We need to speak with you," one officer said. "There have been reports of a woman matching the description you gave us." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" The officer explained that she had been spotted in the area, and they wanted to know if I had seen her again. I shook my head, the memories flooding back. "No, but I think she might be dangerous." The officers nodded, their expressions grave. They informed me they were doing everything they could to track her down, and warned me to stay vigilant. As they left, I felt a mix of fear and anger. How could she still be out there? That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a familiar unease creeping back in. I pulled the covers up tight, determined to keep the darkness at bay. But just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, the sound of soft laughter. My heart stopped. The sound echoed through the silence, and I sat up, frozen in place. The laughter continued, childlike and innocent, but I knew better. I knew it was her. I bolted upright, grabbing my phone and dialing 911, my hands shaking uncontrollably. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator answered, her voice calm. "I can hear her. The woman from before," I screamed, feeling panic clawing at my throat. "Stay calm, ma'am. Can you lock your doors?" "They're locked," I shouted, feeling trapped. I could hear her footsteps now, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway. "Stay on the line," the operator instructed, but I couldn't focus. I was overwhelmed with fear. "She's coming," I whispered, my voice shaking. Just then I heard a knock at my door. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed my back against the wall, my heart racing. "Help me," a voice called softly, and my blood ran cold. It was her. "Please, let me in." I felt paralyzed, torn between the urge to run and the desperation to help. I knew better, I had to stay safe. But what if she was really in danger? I could hear the officers outside, sirens blaring in the distance. "You have to help me," she pleaded again, and I felt the darkness close in around me. I was about to break, about to unlock the door, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. It was the police. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice trembling. The officers burst into the room, quickly assessing the situation. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one of them asked, scanning the area. I pointed to the door. "She's right there." But when they opened the door, there was nothing, only silence. The officers exchanged worried glances. "There's no one here," one said, disbelief evident in his tone. "She was just here," I cried, feeling tears well up. "You have to believe me." The officers assured me they would continue searching, but deep down, I knew the truth. She was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her next opportunity. I had survived the night, but I would never be free of the fear she instilled in me. The nights continued to stretch on, filled with uncertainty and paranoia. I could still hear the whispers and feel the shadows creeping in. I learned to lock every door, every window, every night, but I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that lingered. And then one day, as I was scrolling through social media, I came across a post that made my heart race. The authorities had caught her. They had finally tracked her down and taken her back to the facility. Relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. A part of me wondered if she would return, if she would come back for me. But for now, I could breathe again. The shadows that lurked in my mind would take time to fade, but I knew I was safe for the moment. I learned to be vigilant, to trust my instincts, and to never ignore the darkness that hides just beyond the light. If you've ever felt a presence when you were alone, or if something eerie happened to you at home, share your experience below. Your story could remind others to stay aware of what lurks in the shadows. I was always the quiet kid, the one who preferred the company of books over people. So when my parents decided to go away for the weekend and leave me home alone, I felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. My name is Jake, and while the thought of solitude thrilled me, deep down I was aware that there was a reason parents always caution their kids against staying alone. I'd never really thought about it until that weekend. What was supposed to be a peaceful retreat quickly turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for years. The sun dipped below the horizon as I settled into the living room, a bowl of popcorn in my lap and my favorite horror movie ready to play. I loved the thrill of being scared. It made me feel alive. As the opening credits rolled, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through me. The atmosphere of my home was perfect for a horror movie marathon. The lights dimmed, the house quiet, and a sense of isolation surrounded me. An hour into the movie, I heard the first noise. It was faint, a low creaking sound coming from the hallway leading to my parents' bedroom. I brushed it off as the house settled. It was old and prone to the odd groan here and there. But as I resumed watching, the sound returned, louder this time, almost like footsteps. My heart raced. I turned the volume down, straining to listen, but the house was eerily quiet again. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered to myself, forcing my attention back to the screen. The movie continued, but the unease lingered like a shadow. I decided to grab another handful of popcorn when I heard it again, this time more distinct. It sounded like something dragging across the floor. I paused the movie, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Mom, is that you?" I called out, my voice trembling in the silence. No response, just the hollow echo of my voice fading into the darkness. I took a deep breath and stood up, my instincts kicking in as I moved toward the hallway. With each step, the floor creaked beneath me, and my heart pounded louder than the movie soundtrack that now felt absurdly far away. I reached the hallway and peered into the dim light filtering from the living room. Everything seemed normal, but there was an unsettling feeling that made me hesitate. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I could have sworn I heard a whisper. I pushed the door open and found nothing but the space and the faint scent of something rotten. Maybe the neighbors are having a party, I rationalized, stepping back and closing the door. I returned to the living room and pressed play on the movie again, hoping to distract myself. However, the atmosphere had shifted, and every sound in the house now felt amplified. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just my imagination. I was alone in a big house, and that could mess with anyone's head. I forced myself to focus on the screen, but as the night dragged on, the noises returned with a vengeance. The creaking footsteps echoed more frequently, and the dragging sound became clearer, almost as if something was crawling through the house. Each sound sent spikes of adrenaline through my veins. It was late, and I knew I should be tired, but sleep felt impossible. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, and felt a wave of relief wash over me when I saw it was only midnight. I stood up again, my instincts still on high alert. I couldn't just sit there waiting for something to happen. I decided to make a quick snack in the kitchen, hoping that a bit of food would calm my nerves. As I stepped into the kitchen, The fluorescent light flickered above me, making shadows dance along the walls. I fished out some bread and cheese from the fridge as I heard it again, that dragging noise, now sounding like it was coming from the basement. The basement, I had always been too afraid to go down there alone. "It's just your imagination," I whispered to myself. I quickly made a sandwich and rushed back to the living room, but the moment I sat down, I could still hear the dragging sound. My mind raced. What if someone had broken in? What if they were hiding in the house? I shook my head, trying to banish the thoughts, but they persisted. The dragging sound morphed into what felt like whispers, punctuated by occasional thuds. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the living room and steeled myself. The night was far from over, and I couldn't allow fear to control me. I moved toward the basement door, heart pounding in my chest. The old wooden door looked ominous, but I had to know. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the door leading to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The cold air hit me like a wave as I reached the bottom, and I flicked on the light switch. The single bulb flickered to life, illuminating the damp and cluttered space. There were old boxes and furniture covered in sheets that seemed to hold their breath in the shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky and uncertain. Silence. The only sound was the faint dripping of water from a pipe somewhere. I stepped further into the basement, scanning the room for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A shadow darted behind a stack of boxes, and I froze, my heart racing. "Who's there?" I yelled, gripping the bat tightly. But just as quickly as I saw it, it vanished into the darkness. Panic surged through me. I turned to run back up the stairs, but in my haste, I tripped over an old box and fell hard to the ground. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, and the bat slipped from my grip. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air. The basement felt alive now, as shadows seemed to swirl around me. "This isn't real," I told myself, frantically searching for the bat. As I bent down to grab it, I heard a low growl coming from the darkness. It wasn't my imagination anymore. Something was down there with me. I snatched the bat and bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear it behind me now, footsteps echoing in the darkness. I scrambled up the stairs 2 at a time, my mind racing with every terrible scenario that could happen. Just as I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut behind me, and I flung myself against it, panting heavily. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I had to get out. I dashed to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped me as I pulled and pushed, but it felt like it was locked tight. "No, no, no," I cried. The fear coursed through my veins as I heard the footsteps again, this time accompanied by a low whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Let me out," I begged, but the house remained silent. I turned and ran for the nearest window, desperately trying to pry it open. Just as I was about to break the glass, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I turned to see the shadowy figure emerging from the darkness of the hallway. It was there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. I was frozen in fear, unable to scream or move as it stepped closer. It was tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and a face that was obscured by darkness. "Help me," it whispered. My heart raced as it reached out toward me, its fingers stretching unnaturally. "What do you want?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. "Help me," it repeated, but the voice sounded distorted and broken. Suddenly it lunged at me, and I stumbled back, falling to the ground. I rolled over and scrambled to my feet, running toward the back door. I could hear it behind me, but I didn't dare look back. The door was locked too, but I had no choice. I smashed against it with my shoulder and felt it give way just enough for me to slip outside into the night. I bolted into the backyard and kept running toward the fence. The moonlight illuminated my path, but the shadows felt alive all around me. I could hear it screaming my name in a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. I reached the fence and started climbing over when I heard a deafening crash from behind me. I didn't look back, I just kept climbing. I finally made it over and landed hard on the other side. I stumbled into the neighbor's yard and kept running until I reached their front door. I banged on it frantically, praying someone was home. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a confused and sleepy neighbor. "Jake, what's wrong?" she asked, concern washing over her face. "Help me, please," I gasped. "There's something in my house." She quickly ushered me inside, locking the door behind me. I collapsed on the floor, breathless and shaken. "What happened?" she asked. I could barely find the words to explain as I struggled to catch my breath. But as I looked back toward my house, I saw the shadow standing in the window, staring out at me. I could feel its gaze, even from across the yard. I never went back to that house. I told my parents I stayed at a friend's place that night. They never questioned it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that house was still watching me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to come back. A few days later, I heard the police had caught a man in the area, someone who had been breaking into homes while people were away. They found him hiding in an abandoned house just a block away from mine. They said he had been living in the shadows, watching families. I never felt safe in that neighborhood again. Sometimes I still hear whispers at night, echoes of what happened, and I remember that thing in the dark. I never told anyone what I saw, not even my parents, because I know deep down that whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. My name is Jessica, and I'm a 23-year-old college student. I live in a small, quiet town where nothing ever happens. You know the type of place, friendly neighbors, quaint shops, and an unspoken rule that everyone is always watching out for one another. So, when my parents decided to take a weekend trip to visit my aunt in another state, I felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. I'd never been home alone for such an extended period before. At first, the thought of having the entire house to myself filled me with glee. I could stay up late, eat whatever I wanted, and enjoy some peace without anyone around to bother me. However, as the sun began to set on that fateful Friday evening, a creeping sense of unease settled in. It started with the little things. The house felt too quiet, almost oppressive. The ticking of the clock in the living room seemed louder than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I convinced myself that I was just being silly, so I prepared myself a quick dinner and decided to binge watch some of my favorite shows. As I settled into the couch with a bowl of popcorn, the familiar sounds of the show faded into the background. It wasn't long before I heard a noise that made my heart skip a beat. It was a soft thud coming from the back of the house. I paused the show and sat in silence, listening intently. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Maybe it was just the wind, or perhaps the neighbor's cat had gotten inside. After a moment of hesitation, I shook off my nerves and resumed watching TV, attributing the noise to my overactive imagination. Later that night, the sky turned an inky black, and the shadows in the house grew longer. I decided it was time to head to bed. After brushing my teeth and changing into my pajamas, I made sure to check the doors and windows, securing the house just as my parents had taught me. As I crawled under the covers, I felt a small comfort in the familiarity of my room. The comforting glow of my bedside lamp illuminated the space, casting soft shadows on the walls. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, unable to drift off. Just as I was about to give in and turn on my phone for a distraction, I heard it again, the thud, followed by a scratching sound. This time, it seemed to come from the basement. My heart raced as I recalled that my parents had told me never to go into the basement alone. Something about it being unsafe due to the old wiring. I took a deep breath and convinced myself it was just my imagination. I was alone after all. But as I lay there in the darkness, the noises persisted, growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like something was dragging itself across the basement floor. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, my heart pounding in my chest. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a sudden crash followed by silence. My instincts kicked in and I grabbed my phone, its screen illuminating my room. I knew I had to investigate. I couldn't just lay there, wondering what was happening. I got out of bed, my legs shaky beneath me. I crept towards the basement door, which stood ominously at the end of the hall. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, as if something were trying to hold me back. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled as I twisted it, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark void that seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. I flicked on the basement light switch, and the room flickered to life. The basement was cluttered with old boxes and furniture, and the smell of mildew hung in the air. I stepped down the creaky stairs, feeling a chill creep up my spine. The sound had stopped, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. I strained to listen, but only the sound of my breathing echoed back. I took another step, scanning the room for anything out of the ordinary. My gaze fell on a large cardboard box near the back wall, partially obscured by an old chair. The box seemed to vibrate slightly, as if something inside was moving. Panic surged within me, but I fought against it. I took a cautious step forward and reached for the box, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to lift the lid, I heard a loud bang coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the old furnace making its usual noises. I turned back to the box and pulled the lid open with a shaky hand. Inside was a pile of old clothes, crumpled and dusty. Just as I let out a sigh of relief, I noticed something glinting in the corner of the box. I reached in and pulled out a small rusted key. It was cold to the touch and felt strangely heavy in my hand. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, a chilling, breathy sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jessica. It was faint but distinct, as if someone was calling my name from the depths of the basement. My heart raced, and I dropped the key, clattering it against the box as I stumbled backward. I turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut with a loud bang, plunging me back into darkness. I rushed to the door and yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I pounded against the door, screaming for help, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the basement. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I froze, fear gripping me like a vice. I turned slowly to face whatever was lurking in the shadows. In the dim light, I could make out a figure standing at the far end of the basement. Its features were obscured, but I could see its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Jessica," the voice whispered again, echoing in my mind. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I desperately searched for a way out. I finally saw a window high up on the wall, but it was too high to reach. My breaths came in short gasps as I considered my options. I could hear the figure moving closer, the sound of its footsteps echoing ominously in the small space. I ran to the old furnace, hoping to find something to defend myself with. As I rummaged through the junk, I felt a chill race up my spine. I could sense that the figure was now right behind me, almost breathing down my neck. In a burst of adrenaline, I turned and grabbed a rusty pipe from the floor, brandishing it in front of me. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to sound brave, but my voice trembled with fear. The figure stepped into the light, and my stomach dropped. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and hollow. She looked as though she had been trapped down here for years, her hair tangled and matted. "Let me out," she whispered, her voice chillingly calm. I shook my head, backing away from her. "What do you want?" I demanded, raising the pipe higher as if it could somehow protect me. "You have to help me," she pleaded, reaching out a skeletal hand toward me. "I'm trapped here. You have to let me out." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to help her, to free her from whatever nightmare she was living in, but a larger part of me screamed that I had to get away from her. I turned to run back toward the stairs, but she lunged forward, her fingers grazing my arm. The moment she touched me, a wave of dread washed over me. Visions flooded my mind, images of the basement filled with bodies, of countless souls trapped in darkness. I gasped, pulling away from her grasp as her hollow eyes seemed to pierce through me. "You can't escape," she hissed, a terrifying grin spreading across her face. "You belong here now." In a panic, I swung the pipe at her, but she vanished into thin air, leaving only an oppressive silence in her wake. My breath came in ragged gasps as I bolted for the stairs, throwing my weight against the door. To my shock, it swung open with a creak, as if it had never been locked. I rushed up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to calm my racing heart. I had to get out of the house. I grabbed my phone and sprinted to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a soft voice calling my name once more. "Jessica." It echoed through the hall, chilling me to the bone. I hesitated for a moment, caught between terror and curiosity, but I couldn't stay. I flung the door open and dashed outside into the cool night air, desperate to escape the nightmare that had unfolded within those walls. I ran until I reached the end of the driveway, my mind racing with thoughts. What had just happened? Was the woman real? Was she truly trapped, or was she something far more sinister? As I caught my breath under the dim light of the street lamp, I glanced back at the house. The windows were dark, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow moving behind one of them. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination. I couldn't share this experience with anyone. Who would believe me? I decided to call my parents. When my mom answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Hey, can you guys come home early? I'm feeling anxious." "Is everything okay?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "Yeah, just come home." I hung up and turned back to the house one last time. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. As I waited for my parents to return, I vowed to never stay home alone again. Whatever had happened in that basement had changed me forever. The night was dark and the shadows were long, but deep down, I knew I had escaped something far worse than I could ever understand. As the headlights of my parents' car approached, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. But as I stepped back toward the driveway, a chilling whisper drifted through the night air once more. "Jessica." I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the silence of the night, stretching out like a dark void. I will never forget that voice, the haunting call that echoed in my mind. Even as my parents pulled into the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never truly be safe again. That night would haunt me long after my parents returned home, a reminder that some doors are better left closed and some shadows are best left undisturbed. I had thought I would be able to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my night wasn't over. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the truth lingered. I wasn't alone. My name is Daniel, and I've always enjoyed solitude. As a 24-year-old graphic designer, I spent most of my days working from home, usually with only the sound of my fingers clicking against the keyboard as a company. But when my roommate decided to take a spontaneous trip to visit family for the weekend, I was left alone in our small apartment. At first I was excited, a whole weekend to myself. I planned to catch up on my favorite shows, binge-watch horror movies, and enjoy the peace. But as the sun began to set on that Friday evening, an unsettling feeling crept into the pit of my stomach. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the thought that I should have been grateful for the company, however annoying it might have been. The first night passed without incident. I made some popcorn, curled up on the couch, and lost myself in the world of a particularly gripping horror film. Around midnight, the film ended, and I turned off the TV, ready to call it a night. I made my way to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and settled into bed, pulling the blankets tightly around me. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a noise. It was faint, like a soft rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I lay still for a moment, straining to listen. Maybe it was just the old pipes or the wind outside. I shook my head, dismissing my paranoia, and closed my eyes again. But then the noise came again. This time it was louder, a distinct clatter followed by what sounded like a low, hushed whisper. My heart raced. I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening. I didn't want to believe it, but the whisper sounded like it was calling my name. "Daniel." I rubbed my eyes, convincing myself I was imagining things. I checked my phone. It was 1:02 a.m. I glanced at the clock on the wall and hesitated for a moment. I felt like an idiot, but I couldn't just lie in bed and let my imagination run wild. I had to investigate. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold floor sending a shiver up my spine. I stepped into the hallway, the darkness enveloping me like a heavy blanket. The apartment felt alive with shadows, the faint light from the street illuminating the walls in an eerie glow. I made my way to the kitchen, each step filled with trepidation. As I entered the kitchen, I found it empty, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the corners. The only thing that greeted me was the refrigerator humming softly in the silence. Just as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the counter. A small notebook lay open, a pen resting beside it. I could have sworn I had left the notebook closed earlier. Cautiously, I approached it, feeling a knot tightening in my stomach. I glanced down at the pages, and my heart dropped. The pages were filled with messy handwriting, a mixture of doodles and half-finished sentences. But at the top of one page in large scrawled letters were the words, "I see you." I backed away slowly, panic rising within me. This was impossible. I was alone. I had been alone for hours. My mind raced with questions. Had my roommate returned without me knowing? But no, that didn't make sense. He had gone to his family's house for the weekend. I grabbed my phone and considered calling him, but the thought of sounding paranoid made me hesitate. Instead, I decided to check the front door. I opened it cautiously, peering into the dimly lit hallway outside. Everything appeared normal. No signs of a break-in, no unexpected visitors. Just as I was about to close the door, I heard it again, a whisper, echoing from somewhere in the apartment. "Daniel." My breath caught in my throat. The sound came from the living room. I felt frozen in place, torn between wanting to run and a strange curiosity pulling me closer. What was happening? I stepped back into the apartment, closing the door behind me. My heart thudded in my chest as I made my way into the living room. The silence hung heavy in the air, and I scanned the room, my eyes darting between the shadows. The couch sat undisturbed, and the TV was dark. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the tension was palpable. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. A flicker of something in the hallway leading to my roommate's bedroom. I froze, my breath hitching as I stared into the darkness. I thought I saw a figure slip away, just for a moment, before disappearing into the shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" I took a step forward, heart racing, and peered down the hallway. The door to my roommate's room was slightly ajar, the darkness inside swallowing any hint of light. "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny," I shouted, trying to sound assertive, but my voice wavered. I stepped closer, my body tense with fear. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, revealing an empty room. The bed was unmade, and clothes were strewn across the floor. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger. I backed away slowly, feeling like a puppet on a string, and turned to leave the room. Just as I did, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. My heart dropped, and I scrambled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, shouting for it to open. "Let me out, please!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. Suddenly I heard the whisper again, but this time it was different. It was accompanied by a low, chilling laugh. "Daniel, you can't escape." The sound sent a chill down my spine. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was this happening, or was I losing my mind? I could hear footsteps outside the door, moving closer, and the laughter grew louder, more sinister. I turned and ran to the window, desperate for an escape. I opened it and peered out into the darkness below. We lived on the second floor, and there was no way I could jump without injuring myself. I felt trapped, completely at the mercy of whatever was happening. As I turned back toward the door, it creaked open slowly. I braced myself, prepared to confront whatever was waiting for me. But instead of a figure, I was met with silence. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with tension, and I felt a sense of dread creeping back in. I stepped cautiously into the hallway, my heart racing as I glanced around. The laughter had faded, but I could still feel a presence lurking just out of sight. I hurried down the hallway toward the front door, desperate to escape the nightmare that was unfolding. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard it again, the whisper, closer this time. "Daniel." I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, paralyzing me with fear. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to sound brave despite the terror rising within me. "Just someone who wants to play," the voice replied, its tone dripping with malice. Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, and I stumbled back, crashing into the wall. My instincts kicked in, and I ran down the hall toward the bathroom. I slammed the door behind me, locking it just as the figure reached for the handle. I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure on the other side, scratching and clawing at the wood, the whispers echoing in my ears. "Let me in, Daniel. Let's play." I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to dial 911. Just as I hit the call button, the scratching stopped, and an eerie silence filled the air. My heart raced as I listened intently, the tension palpable. "Daniel," the voice whispered, softer now, almost sweet. "You can't hide from me." I felt a shiver run down my spine as the whispers turned into laughter, filling the small bathroom. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to drown it out, but the sound only grew louder, echoing in my mind. "Let me in," it pleaded, the tone shifting from menacing to desperate. "I just want to be friends." I felt my stomach churn. What was happening? Who or what was this thing? I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to find a way out. I made a desperate decision and pushed the window open, glancing down at the small ledge outside. It was a risky move, but I had no choice. I climbed onto the ledge, heart pounding, as I maneuvered carefully along the narrow space. I could hear the whispers fading behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I finally reached the end of the ledge and jumped down, landing hard on the grass below. The cool night air hit me like a wave, and I took off running, not stopping until I reached the end of the driveway. I turned back to look at the apartment, my breath heavy in my chest. The windows were dark, and I could hardly believe what had just happened. I didn't know if I was being followed, but I didn't want to take any chances. I quickly dialed my roommate, praying he would answer. Pick up," I muttered, panic rising within me. Finally, he answered, groggy and confused. Dan, what's going on? I need you to come home. Something's wrong. I can't explain, but please just come back. Wait, what? I'm an hour away. Are you sure you're okay? No, I'm not okay. Just drive fast. I hung up, adrenaline coursing through me. I felt like a coward, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that place. I waited outside, pacing, heart racing, anxiously glancing back at the apartment. After what felt like an eternity, headlights finally appeared at the end of the street. My roommate's car pulled up, and I rushed to the passenger side, barely able to contain my relief. Get in, he shouted, concern etched on his face. I climbed in and slammed the door behind me. Drive, just drive! What the hell is going on, Daniel? He demanded as he sped away from the apartment. I don't know. I think something is in there with me. It was whispering my name, and I couldn't get away. He glanced at me, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief. Are you serious? You're scaring me. I'm not joking. Just go somewhere else, please. As we drove away from the apartment, I glanced back at the dark windows. I could have sworn I saw a shadow move behind one of the panes, but I couldn't be sure. My heart raced as we turned onto a busier street, leaving the quiet neighborhood behind. Let's go to my parents' house, I said, my voice trembling. I need to be somewhere safe. My roommate nodded, speeding down the road. As we left the apartment behind, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that apartment was still watching, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. We arrived at my parents' house, and I rushed inside, feeling a sense of safety envelop me. My mother was already awake, her brow furrowed with worry as I explained what had happened. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, but I didn't care. I just needed to feel safe. Hours passed, and as dawn broke, I finally felt the tension begin to ease. I had survived the night, but I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever truly be free from the whispers that haunted me. In the days that followed, I stayed at my parents' house, too afraid to return to my apartment. But each night, the whispers would creep back into my mind, echoing in the dark corners of my thoughts. Finally, a week later, I returned to the apartment, accompanied by my roommate. The place felt empty, the silence almost deafening. We searched every inch, but there were no signs of the strange occurrences. The whispers were gone, but I knew that something sinister had taken place. Even now, as I sit here typing this, I still hear that voice sometimes. In the quiet moments, when the world is still and my mind wanders, I can almost hear it calling my name, a reminder that whatever had been lurking in the shadows is still out there, waiting for its chance to return.